Edward drove slowly along the narrow country road, both hands tight on the steering wheel. The trees on either side formed a tunnel of fading autumn leaves. The colors were soft now, like old photographs. He glanced at the rearview mirror, though there was no car behind him. It was only habit. For years he had checked to see who might be following. Today, there was only the long strip of road and the weight of his own memories. He cleared his throat as if someone were in the passenger seat. No one was. The faint rattle of a pill bottle in the glove compartment broke the silence whenever the car hit a bump. His wedding ring, now loose on his thin finger, tapped lightly against the steering wheel as he drove. "This is it," he muttered. No turning back this time. His voice sounded unfamiliar, older than he felt inside. He had rehearsed this moment in his mind for many nights. In those late hours, when sleep would not come, he imagined the house, just as they had left it. He imagined Margaret in the doorway, arms folded, pretending to be angry but smiling with her eyes. In those private dreams, there was still time to explain why he had left. Time to say he was sorry. The car turned onto the gravel driveway. The crunch under the tires brought him back to the present. The cabin stood at the end of the path, small and still, the way held. Breath looks in cold air. The roof sagged a little, but the stone chimney was straight. Smoke did not rise from it. The windows reflected only the dull gray sky. Edward parked and sat for a moment, engine off, hands still on the wheel. His heart beat hard in his chest, not from the drive, but from fear of what he might find, or not find, inside. He could feel the silence pressing against the car doors. "Come on, old man," he whispered to himself. "You made it this far." He opened the door and stepped out. The air was cooler than he expected, carrying the smell of pine needles and damp earth. His knees protested as he straightened up. He walked slowly toward the front steps, each footstep stirring the fallen leaves. The house looked both familiar and distant, as if it knew him, but did not trust him yet. The front porch creaked under his weight. He paused at the door. The old brass key was warm from his hand. It was the same key he had carried for years, even when he was far away. He had never thrown it out. He had told himself it was because keys were small, easy to forget in a pocket. The truth was simpler. Part of him had always planned to come back. He slid the key into the lock. The turning sound was loud in the quiet afternoon. The latch gave way with a tired click, like an old person waking from a nap. "Margaret!" he called, before he stopped himself. His voice echoed weakly into the dark hall. He felt foolish. He knew she would not answer. Too much time had passed. Too many things had been left unsaid. He stepped inside. Dust floated in the thin strip of light that fell through the half-open curtain. The air smelled of wood, old fabric, and something faintly sweet, like forgotten flowers. His eyes adjusted slowly. The living room appeared, piece by piece. The couch they had bought in their first year together. The small lamp with the crooked shade. The rug with the pattern of leaves that Margaret had loved. At first glance, everything seemed almost the same. The furniture stood in the places he remembered. A blanket was folded neatly over the back of a chair. A pair of reading glasses rested on a side table. For a heartbeat he felt a wild hope, sharp and painful. Maybe she's still here. Maybe she's just in the next room. "Margaret." He tried again, softer this time. Only the house answered, with a faint creak from somewhere above. His hope dissolved as quickly as it had risen. There was no sound of movement, no footsteps, no familiar sigh from the kitchen. The stillness was too complete. He took a few more steps and then noticed it. The walls above the fireplace were bare. His breath caught. He moved closer to the mantel. Once, it had been crowded with framed photographs. Their wedding day. Their daughter. Edward stood in the kitchen for a long time, the note still in his hand. The words were simple, but they moved in his mind like a slow tide. "If you ever come back, you'll know where to find me." It was not a farewell. It was a riddle. A gentle challenge from a woman who had always believed he could be braver than he felt. He folded the note carefully and slipped it into the breast pocket of his shirt. The paper rested over his heart, light but heavy at the same time. He let out a breath he did not know he was holding and looked around. The kitchen felt oddly staged, as if someone had paused in the middle of a task and never returned. The sink was clean. No dishes waited on the counter. A striped dish towel hung neatly on its hook. On the windowsill above the sink sat the little ceramic bird Margaret had bought at a roadside fair. Its painted eyes looked back at him, calm and patient. He opened the refrigerator. It was empty except for a single glass jar of jam and a small box of baking soda. Both were past their dates. He closed the door again. Whoever had left this house had not been in a hurry. They had taken time to clear things out, to leave it tidy. He moved to the cupboards, one by one. Plates stacked in order, bowls nested inside each other, mugs lined up. On the second shelf, behind the tea tins, he found a familiar tin box with a dent in the lid. It had once held cookies. Now it was filled with recipe cards, all in her handwriting. "Of course," he murmured. "You kept everything in order." His voice sounded small in the quiet room. He set the box down and opened the next drawer. Cutlery. A bundle of rubber bands. A roll of tape. Nothing strange. The next drawer stuck halfway, as if something inside blocked its movement. He pulled a little harder. It slid open with a soft jerk. Inside, neatly arranged, lay a collection of small things that did not belong together at first glance. His old leather gloves, cracked at the knuckles, a tin of shoe polish, a tiny plastic toy car their daughter had once rolled along the table while they ate dinner, a dried daisy pressed flat between two pieces of cardboard. His fingers hovered above the toy car. He did not pick it up. The sight of it alone made his chest ache. He remembered the way their daughter had laughed when the car fell off the edge, and he pretended it had crashed dramatically. He remembered Margaret's smile as she watched them. He remembered the silence that fell over all of them after the accident, as if someone had closed a door on their lives. He closed the drawer halfway, then stopped. Something else lay at the back, beneath the gloves. He pulled them aside. There it was, his old work vest, folded, with a line of fine stitches across the torn pocket. The repair was careful and almost invisible. Margaret's work. She had hated to see useful things thrown away. He lifted the vest and held it up. The faint smell of their past life clung to it, wood shavings, engine oil, and the soap she had used for years. "She still cared," he whispered, "even after I left." The thought cut him more deeply than anger ever could. She had not burned his things. She had mended them. She had placed them. Edward left the bedroom slowly, the photograph still warm from his hand. The hallway felt narrower now, as if the house itself had shifted while he was gone. He paused at the doorway to the living room, letting his eyes travel over every corner again, searching for anything he might have missed. The shadows on the walls looked longer, the silence heavier. Yet something had changed inside him. The note in his pocket was no longer just a mystery. It was a direction. The photograph was not just a memory. It was a map. He walked back toward the kitchen through the dim afternoon light. His footsteps were quiet, though the wooden floor creaked under him now, more than it had in the past. Age showed itself in everything: wood, air, and in his own bones. He placed a hand on the back of a chair to steady himself. As he reached the kitchen threshold, "This place hasn't forgotten her," he murmured. It was true. The house held a kind of soft order, as if Margaret had moved through it gently before her final departure. The dish towel hung straight. A jar of dried herbs stood next to the stove, its label written in her neat script. Someone had cared enough to keep things tidy. Someone had imagined he might return. Edward leaned against the counter. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the familiar smells come back to him: lavender soap, fresh bread, pine from the woods outside. Sense of a life that had once seemed ordinary. Sense he had walked away from. "You waited longer than I deserved," he whispered. He opened his eyes again and scanned the room carefully. If Margaret had left clues, she had done it with intention. She had always been patient, but she had also been precise. He knew her habits better than he admitted. She kept important things where they could be found, but only by someone looking with care. He pulled a chair out and sat at the kitchen table. The silence settled around him like a blanket. He placed both hands flat on the table and looked down. He had expected the note to be the end of it, but the house had offered more, and he sensed there was still something waiting to be uncovered. His gaze moved to the built-in shelf near the pantry. A row of cookbooks lined it, their spines worn and faded. Margaret's handwriting appeared in small notes tucked between pages. He pushed himself up again and walked over. One book leaned slightly forward, as if nudged by a gentle hand. He pulled it out. It was a slim collection of poems she had loved, poems they used to read on rainy evenings when they were young. A dried leaf fell from between the pages and landed on the floor. He bent down, picked it up, and held it under the kitchen light. It had once been green, now brown and fragile. He opened the book where the leaf had rested. Inside was an old train ticket from years ago, tucked like a bookmark. He turned it over. On the back were two small words written in her careful hand: "Follow us." He swallowed hard. The message was tender. Edward stepped outside into the fading light of late afternoon. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine needles and cool soil. He paused on the porch and placed one hand on the railing, steadying himself as he looked toward the long gravel road. The house behind him felt different now, not abandoned, but empty with purpose. Margaret had left him clues, and he had found them. The next step was clear. The lake. He reached the car slowly, gripping the handle with stiff fingers. Before opening the door, he glanced back at the cabin. Its windows reflected the pale sky, offering no hint of the woman who once filled it with warmth. But the house was no longer a question. It had become an answer. He slid into the driver's seat. The cushion sank under his weight, familiar yet foreign after so many years. He placed both hands on the wheel. They trembled, but not from weakness. It was something deeper: anticipation, fear, regret, hope. Emotions he had kept buried now rose like water breaking through old cracks. "All right," he murmured, his voice low. "Let's see where you've gone, Maggie." He started the engine. The car vibrated gently, a soft hum that steadied him. As he backed out of the driveway, stones shifted beneath the tires, and the sound echoed across the quiet clearing. It felt like a farewell, but it also felt like the beginning of something he had avoided for decades. The main road welcomed him with long shadows and familiar bends. He drove slowly, conscious of the weight inside his chest. The lake was not far, but distance was not what troubled him. The memories were. He passed the general store first. The wooden sign creaked softly in the wind. The parking area was empty except for an old pickup. He remembered buying nails and rope there during one early summer, when he and Margaret restored the cabin roof. They had eaten sandwiches on the porch afterward, laughing as their daughter ran circles around them, pretending she was a bird. He pulled over. Something urged him to stop. The store's bell jingled as he entered. The sound was the same as it had been 40 years ago. Behind the counter stood Mrs. Callahan, white-haired now, but her posture still straight, her eyes still sharp. She blinked at him. Then her expression softened. "Well," she said, her voice gentle. "Edward Turner. Haven't seen you in a long time." He nodded, the corners of his mouth lifting slightly. "It's been a while. I heard you were back," she said. "She told me you would be." His breath caught. "Margaret came here almost every week," Mrs. Callahan replied. "Usually bought tea or flour, but mostly she came to sit on the bench outside. Said it helped her think." Edward lowered his gaze. "And she ever say anything about leaving?" Mrs. Callahan looked at him with quiet sympathy. "Only once. She said if you ever found your way home, she hoped you'd follow the things she left for you." He tightened his jaw. "I am following them. She'd be glad to hear that." Edward stood still when he first noticed the wooden box, sitting at the end of the dock. It was small, no larger than a lunch pail, but its presence was powerful enough to stop him mid-step. The box looked recently placed. The wood was smooth, not yet faded by sun or rain. A thin red ribbon wrapped around it, tied in a gentle bow. Margaret had always tied bows that way, simple, neat, with the ends cut evenly. He drew a slow breath and stepped forward. Each movement sent a soft groan through the dock boards beneath him. The lake remained calm, the surface shifting only where the faint breeze touched it. His reflection wavered on the water, older than he felt in his mind, marked by years he had not fully lived. He paused halfway down the dock, gripping the railing. His knees trembled, not from the walk but from the weight of the moment. This place had once been filled with life. Here, their daughter had dipped her toes in the water, squealing when the cold surprised her. Here, he and Margaret had shared quiet mornings, the kind where words seemed unnecessary. The lake had held them through joy and heartbreak. Now it held only silence. He moved on, slowly, until he reached the end of the dock. The wooden box sat waiting, patient. The red ribbon shifted slightly with the breeze. Edward knelt with difficulty, placing one hand on the dock to steady himself. His fingers brushed the top of the box. The wood felt warm from the sun. He hesitated, closing his eyes for a moment, letting the air fill his lungs. "Maggie," he whispered, his voice thin, "what did you leave for me?" The only answer was the soft lapping of water against the dock. He pulled the box closer. The ribbon came undone with a light tug. The sound was barely audible, yet it felt as loud as a turning page in a silent room. He lifted the lid gently. Inside was a single envelope, sealed with wax. The seal bore a small impression of a bird, the same symbol on the ceramic bird in the kitchen window. Margaret had always loved that bird. She said it reminded her of hope, something fragile but persistent. Edward swallowed, then picked up the envelope. His hands shook slightly as he broke the seal. He unfolded the letter inside. The handwriting was hers, steady, graceful, familiar enough to bring tears to his eyes before he read the first line. "Edward, my love." His breath trembled. He continued, "If you are reading this, then you found your way back. I always believed you would. Not because you owed me anything, but because I knew the road would eventually lead you home, when your heart was ready. Edward stayed at the end of the dock until the light began to fade. The sky deepened into purples and soft blues, and the first evening star appeared above the tree line. When the air grew colder, he slowly stood, holding the letter close to his chest. His legs felt stiff, but his mind was clear. There was one more place he needed to go before nightfall, the small clinic near town. If Margaret had been ill, someone there would know, someone would have seen her, and someone might carry the final pieces of her story. He walked back to the car, leaning heavily on the railing. The gravel crunched softly under his shoes as he approached the driver's door. He opened it carefully and lowered himself inside. The engine hummed to life, and he let his hands rest on the wheel. For a moment before moving, the drive to town was short. The lights of the clinic appeared through the trees, like small lanterns guiding him forward. He parked near the entrance and stepped out. The glass doors slid open, releasing a gentle scent of antiseptic and flowers. Someone had placed a vase of daisies at the reception desk. A nurse at the counter looked up when he entered. She was in her 60s, silver hair pulled back neatly, eyes kind. "May I help you?" she asked. Edward cleared his throat. "I'm looking for information about someone." Her name was Margaret Turner. The nurse's expression softened. She nodded slowly, as if the name was familiar in a way that had lingered. "You must be Edward," she said. He blinked. "You knew me?" "Margaret spoke of you often," she replied gently. "I'm Helen. I took care of her during her last months." He felt something inside him falter. Was she in pain? Helen shook her head softly. No, she was peaceful most days. Quiet, but peaceful. She liked to sit by the window and watch the birds. Sometimes she asked me to open the window, so she could feel the breeze from the lake. Edward looked down at his hands. They trembled slightly. "Did she leave anything here?" Helen gestured toward a small room near the hallway. "Come with me." He followed her inside. The room was small, with a single chair and a cabinet. Helen opened the cabinet slowly and took out a folded scarf. It was light blue with thin white stripes, the scarf he had bought Margaret on their 20th anniversary. She placed it gently in Edward's hands. "She kept this with her every day," Helen said. "She told me it was a reminder that love doesn't disappear just because life becomes difficult." Edward lifted the scarf to his face. It still held a faint scent of lavender. Helen continued, "On her last day, she asked me to give you a message. She said, tell him I waited. Tell him he didn't fail me. Tell him I knew he would find his way back when his heart was ready." Edward closed his eyes. The words flowed into him like warm water, softening every place that had hardened over the years. Helen stepped closer. She wasn't afraid. That lake meant everything to her. She believed it would guide you. He nodded slowly. "It did." Helen gave a gentle smile. Then she was right. Edward held the scarf carefully, as if it were fragile. He thanked Helen and stepped back into the cool night. The stars above were brighter now, scattered across the sky, like pieces of a map. He stood beside his car for a moment. Edward drove back toward the cabin with the scarf folded neatly on the passenger seat. The night deepened around him, and the road ahead glowed in thin silver lines under the headlights. The letter from the lake lay in his pocket, its paper warm from his body. Helen's words echoed inside him, steady and quiet, settling into places that had been empty for far too long. She waited. She believed you'd return. She wasn't afraid. The tires hummed on the pavement. The only other sound was Edward's breathing, slow, deliberate, as if he were learning again how to draw air into lungs that had once held nothing but regret. Halfway back to the cabin, he slowed the car. A small turnoff appeared on the right, leading toward a hillside that overlooked the lake. He hadn't planned to stop, but something stirred in him, a memory, faint but insistent. He pulled over, turned off the engine, and stepped out. The night air was cold now, sharp enough to sting his cheeks. Overhead, the sky stretched wide and clear, scattered with stars. He walked up the hill slowly, breath forming small clouds in the darkness. His cane sank slightly into the soft ground as he climbed. When he reached the crest, he paused. Below him lay the lake, still as glass, reflecting the moonlight in a long silver trail. From this view, the dock looked like a narrow finger, pointing toward the center of the water, guiding anyone who approached to a place of reflection. A few fireflies blinked near the reeds, tiny pulses of life in the quiet night. Edward stood there for a long time, letting the view settle into him. This was the place where he and Margaret had often watched the sunset, even before their daughter was born. The place where they once spoke about dreams, small ones, like building a garden, bigger ones, like traveling to the coast. dreams that changed shape after loss, but never fully disappeared. He sank down onto an old bench resting near the top of the hill. The wood was cold, but the view felt like a warm hand on his shoulder. As he sat, memories rose, not the heavy ones, not the ones shaped by grief, but gentle memories. Margaret laughing as he pretended to skip stones, though his throws always sank immediately. Their daughter chasing butterflies near the shore. Quiet evenings when they rested side by side, needing nothing but each other's presence. Then other memories came, harder ones. After their daughter died, the lake had changed for him. The silence felt accusatory. The water felt too still. The reflections bothered him, and he had walked away not just from the lake, but from the life Margaret had tried to hold together. He pressed a hand to his forehead. "I should have stayed," he whispered. But the night did not judge him. The stars did not dim. The air did not grow colder. Everything simply remained, patient and unchanged, as if reminding him that healing was not a race but a return. He breathed deeply. Then another memory surfaced, something Helen had said. She came to watch the birds. She liked the breeze from the lake. She kept your scarf with her every day. Edward opened his eyes. He unfolded the scarf, letting it drape across his palms. The fabric fluttered lightly in the wind. He imagined her sitting on this very bench, the scarf around her shoulders, her gaze drifting over the water. "She wasn't alone," he said softly. "Not really." His voice softened further. "You had the lake. You had the memories. You had hope." A gentle ache filled his chest, pain, but also a kind of gratitude. Edward drove back toward the cabin with a quiet steadiness he had not felt in years. The road looked familiar again, not heavy with ghosts this time, but softened by the night breeze and the pale light of the moon. The lanterns in the memorial garden had guided him out gently, as if assuring him that he was not leaving anything behind, only carrying it forward. When he reached the cabin, he parked the car and turned off the engine. The silence wrapped around him like a warm blanket. He sat for a moment with his hands resting on the steering wheel. His palms no longer trembled. His breath felt fuller, deeper. Peace did not come like a wave, it came like a soft tide, touching the shore, quiet and steady. He opened the door and stepped onto the gravel. The cabin's windows glowed faintly with the reflection of the moon. The forest around him hummed with the soft chorus of insects and distant owls. The world felt alive, awake, yet calm. As he approached the porch, he noticed something he had missed earlier. The front door was open just a crack, not wide, not alarming, just slightly ajar, as if inviting him in. He paused only briefly, then pushed it open and stepped inside. The interior was dim, lit only by the moon filtering through the curtains. The faint scent of lavender lingered in the air. The house did not feel empty anymore. It felt expectant, as though it had been holding its breath for years, and was now finally exhaling. Edward moved toward the fireplace. The mantel was still bare, the faded rectangles on the wall marking where photographs once hung. He walked to the small box from the bedroom, the one holding the framed memories, and carried it carefully into the living room. He placed it on the coffee table, and began lifting each photograph with slow, reverent hands. He chose the first frame, their wedding day. Margaret with her shy smile, him with his crooked tie. He hung it back in its old place. The wall seemed brighter with it restored. Next came their daughter's photo, the one with the red balloon. Edward brushed a thumb over the child's joyful face and whispered, "I remember." He placed it on the mantel, just left of center, Margaret's favorite spot. One by one, the wall regained its history. The picnic, the holidays, the candid shots Margaret loved because they showed life unposed. Each frame returned, not as a reminder of loss, but as a testimony of love lived honestly, imperfectly, and together. When he finished, he stepped back and took in the sight. The mantel looked whole again. The room felt anchored, as if the house had found its missing heartbeat. He moved toward the fireplace next, crouching slightly as he lifted a few pieces of dry wood. His joints protested, but he continued. He struck a match, watched it bloom into a small flame, and lit the logs. The fire caught slowly, then rose, filling the room with a gentle, flickering warmth. Edward placed 2 rocking chairs in front of the fire, one on each side of the hearth. They were worn, the wooden curves smoothed by years of use. He lowered himself into one, settling comfortably as the fire crackled. Into the other chair, he placed the folded blue scarf he had brought back from the memorial garden. "You always liked sitting close to the fire," he said quietly. The scarf shifted slightly in the warm breeze rising from the flames. The motion was small, almost nothing, but enough to stir something deep inside him, a sense that the room was no longer empty. In the glow of the fire, he let his eyes roam the room. Everything looked clear.